You, to me, some of you dear old friends, I just want to say it's great to be back home with all of you. Things around here have changed some. There's a lot of young blood in the building, men and women who have entered the arena. Welcome. Welcome. As Teddy Roosevelt told us in his famous speech, citizenship in a republic, the arena is not a place for the faint-hearted. Roosevelt described it in vivid detail: the dust, the sweat, the fights, the triumphs, the defeats. He could have been writing about the end of any legislative session here, particularly if someone dares cross Lyman Hoffman or Click Bishop, or for that matter, the Speaker or the House, or any number of you. But the eternal truth in Roosevelt's speech rings true today. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man and the woman in the arena. And that is all of you. So thank you very much for that. Before I get started with my remarks, as I always love to do in this address, I want to introduce my wife, Julie, the love of my life, the most important woman, the most smart, gracious person I know. She is here, as always, by my side. And if you don't agree with anything I say today, I know that you will agree with me when I say that I certainly married up. And for that matter, so did many of you that I'm looking at in this audience. So thank you on that. And my team, I have a great staff. I think many of you know Chad Padgett, my state director, Amanda Coyne, my speechwriter and counselor, Ben Diedrich's here, who does press for me, and Dana Herndon, who is my Southeast Regional Director. And I couldn't do this job without them, and I know you feel the same way about your staff. They're in the arena with us in service of our collective cause, which of course is Alaska. It's such a worthy cause, a big cause, not only because our state geographically is so large, but because everything in it is big. Big hopes and dreams, big imaginations, big, larger-than-life people, like so many of you. In this body, we have truck drivers, placer miners, we have fishermen and peony farmers, we have a whaling captain and a doctor who's also a reindeer herder. We have pilots, we have military heroes. Heck, one of you regularly straps on plastic wings and parasails down a 3,000-foot mountain just for fun. Where's Laddie? There he is. I would bet that no other legislative body in this country has such interesting representatives. Why is that? I'm convinced that's because of our possibilities, our vast resources, our promise, our uniqueness that attracts and keeps people who are daring in spirit, in imagination, and generosity. And it is all of our job to keep that unique Alaska fire burning. Now, I know that in D.C., the big speech of the day today is the President's State of the Union address. I've attended those in the past, full of pomp and formality, and with all due respect to the President, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else in the entire world and right here, right now, with people who really matter and with Alaska's brand of formality. Case in point, I'm confident that no one at the State of the Union tonight will be sporting more dapper attire than my good friend Senator Bert Stedman and a bolo like Josiah's wearing. But in all seriousness this morning, I want to talk about what we're doing on the federal level, in particular my priorities which I hope you share, and realizing what we all know, Alaska's enormous potential is not only critical for the people we represent, it is essential for our country's economic strength, our national security, and fundamentally the soul of our nation. So let me start with my number one priority: revitalizing Alaska's economy and creating opportunities for good jobs for all Alaskans. Now, we have no challenges, no doubt about that, but I'm optimistic, particularly as it concerns opportunities for resource development. The Economist magazine just had a big feature article about us, suggesting a new oil boom in Alaska. With the Willow project, which just received its final EIS last week, and the Pitka project, just those two projects, we could literally be looking at over $10 billion in private sector investment on the North Slope, over 3,000 construction jobs, peak production of these two projects at over 250,000 barrels a day, and billions in revenues for our federal government, state government, North Slope Borough, and communities throughout our state. This is not some pie-in-the-sky dream. This is on the cusp of happening right now. But it's not just our oil and gas industry. As you all know, and you're all supporters like I am, Alaska is an all-of-the-above energy powerhouse. We have enormous wind and solar and hydro and tidal and geothermal and carbon sequestration potential. And importantly, Alaska has the critical minerals the world needs now to support all of these new technologies. And of course, to support our nation's defense. Right now, our country is heavily reliant on China, our chief geopolitical foe, for the vast majority of the critical minerals that we actually have in our own country and in our great state. This has to change, and Alaska is perfectly positioned to meet this need. Whether it's projects like Eucor or Constantine, Ambler, Graphite Creek, or Donlin, we have the minerals and metals that Alaska and America need right now. Next, there is also cause for optimism on our long-sought goal of bringing Alaska's endless supply of clean-burning North Slope natural gas to Alaskans and markets beyond. Putin's brutal invasion of Ukraine has totally upended global energy markets. Our allies in Europe and Asia have a moral and strategic imperative to get off Russian oil and gas, and Alaska is poised to meet this demand. Yes, we've heard it many times in our history. When the natural gas project seemed just right around the corner, we know that. And I'm not saying it's just right around the corner. But for someone who has worked on this big dream for Alaska for many, many years, like so many of you, we are seeing key stakeholder alignment in ways that has never happened before. And that is very exciting. Let me give you a more specific example. In October, I convened an Alaska LNG summit in Tokyo with U.S. Ambassador to Japan, Rahm Emanuel, a big fan of the project and my new best friend in Tokyo. Key stakeholders, investors, producers, engineering firms, the Biden administration at senior levels, the Dunleavy administration, AGDC, Japanese government officials were all there working together to try to move this project forward. We need all to keep working together, all of us, to try to tackle this enormous opportunity for our state. Let me give you another cause for optimism. We've continued the significant military buildup in Alaska. As I often say, our state constitutes 3 pillars of America's military might. We are the cornerstone of missile defense for the whole country. We are the hub of air combat power for the Arctic and the Asia Pacific. And we are a vital strategic platform for elite expeditionary forces. We are building on all of these pillars with your help. Since I've been in office, we have secured billions in military construction for Alaska, and that is continuing. This, of course, has enhanced America's national security, but it's also been a way to strengthen our economy and increase job growth in Alaska. This past year, I was honored to attend the flagging ceremonies for the U.S. Army 11th Airborne Division with many of you in Fairbanks and in Anchorage. The 11th Airborne has a proud and storied history. First activated during World War II for the liberation of the Philippines and the occupation of Japan. The core unit of the 11th Airborne is the former 5,000-person Airborne 4th Brigade of the 25th Infantry Division, what we called the 425. I think we have members of the 425 here, and the 425 has a special place in my heart, even as a Marine. Some might recall that in one of my first legislative speeches to this body, when the Obama administration announced plans to get rid of the 425, I told all of you that that would happen over my dead body. Well, I'm still here, and so is the 425. So what happened? Here's what happened. All of Alaska got in the arena. So many of you, my team and I, so many of us, common Alaskan citizens, held rallies on this issue. We pulled out all the stops collectively as Alaskans to get this strategically misguided Obama administration plan reversed. And we prevailed. And now we have an entire Army Airborne Division, one of only 2 paratrooper divisions in the entire U.S. military stationed right here in the great state of Alaska. Now, I think all of you know that this represents a sea change in the Pentagon's thinking about the Arctic. It wasn't too long ago that our very own Department of Defense saw the Arctic as a strategic backwater. There was no strategy, and there was a Pentagon focus on shutting down bases and units here in Alaska. Now all of that has changed. With the standing up of the 11th Airborne Division in our state, a critical transformation of America's Arctic strategy has occurred. And here's what's really exciting about this. Just 2 weeks ago, I met with the Vice Chief of Staff for the U.S. Army, and he told me that the 11th Airborne Division in Alaska is now the #1 duty selection station for soldiers in the U.S. Army. That is a big deal. That is a big deal. Why? The very high number of tragic suicides our military in Alaska has broken all of our hearts. I've heard from so many of you on this issue. The numbers, as I think you know, are astronomically high, particularly in the interior. We've done much to address this, including passing legislation to improve the quality of life for our military. But for those of you who have served in the military, you know nothing is more important for the well-being of our troops than being part of a unit with high morale and high unit pride, and that is now happening in the 11th Airborne Division in Alaska. We are also now home recently to the Department of Defense's newest regional security center, the Ted Stevens Center for Arctic Security Studies. And real substantial progress has been made on our nation's first critical deepwater Arctic port in Nome, and we are getting an icebreaker home ported right here in Juneau, Alaska. That is going to happen. So with all of these advancements, Alaska has rightly earned our place as the center of gravity for America's Arctic security operations and Arctic economic opportunities. And with your help, this critical role will only increase in importance in the decades to come. So let me talk about another area where we've made some good progress for our economy. Real progress on much needed infrastructure for our state. The bipartisan infrastructure bill that we passed in 2021 wasn't perfect, but here's the bottom line. We are a resource-rich but infrastructure-poor state. Think about it. We have less road miles than Connecticut, and we're almost 120 times bigger than that puny little state. So getting more infrastructure built, roads, bridges, ports, harbors, ferries, has been a top priority of mine as your senator. Billions of dollars for Alaska have been secured as a result of this infrastructure bill. And most recently, we saw the announcement of close to $300 million to improve the ferry system in Southeast Alaska, and that was due to Senator Murkowski's hard work on that issue. But one of the most transformative aspects of this infrastructure bill in terms of federal dollars is the focus on federal broadband dollars and connectivity for our state. With these funds, and we will be getting billions because we wrote the infrastructure bill to focus on communities and states without internet connectivity, and unfortunately we were number one in that category. But with these funds, the goal of connecting all Alaskans, every community, every village, town, is within our reach. Coordination, however, is key. The critical player now is going to be the state and all of you. We need to be good stewards of these funds, but this is an enormously exciting opportunity for Alaska. And that is why last summer, I know a number of you attended, and I was very honored we convened a summit in Anchorage on this very topic. We brought together senior federal officials overseeing broadband funds. We brought together the governor, many of you, Bryce was there, leaders in the state, local, tribal leaders, industry, to ensure that we have to have a plan to work together so there's no duplication of services, no waste or abuse of these funds, and that the feds understood our unique challenges. So again, think of the opportunities if we can achieve this together. For education, for small businesses, for telehealth. The opportunities for Alaska are limitless, and this is something you have my commitment to work with all of you on in the coming years. Let me talk about another area where we've seen in some ways the best of times and the worst of times, and that is our fisheries, which employ more Alaskans than any other industry. Salmon is the lifeblood of our state and our economy and our cultural traditions. We've seen shocking and unprecedented declines among some species, while in other parts of the state, runs have been at historic highs. All Alaskans can agree we have to address research gaps with data and the best scientific minds, including our indigenous communities that have harvested salmon for thousands of years. We must understand why stocks of certain salmon, like our iconic Yukon King, have crashed. This is an imperative for me, and I know it's an imperative for so many of you. There is some good news on that front. My Alaska Salmon Resource Task Force Act was recently signed into law. This will expand our understanding of this challenge so that we can achieve increased abundance and stability in our salmon stocks for the benefit of all Alaskans. As many of you know, I serve on the Commerce Committee, which has oversight for America's fisheries. I like to brag about Alaska. My Senate colleagues, I think, get sick of it, but I call our great state the superpower of seafood. And we are. About two-thirds of all seafood harvested in America, two-thirds commercial, sport, subsistence, comes from our great state and our great waters. So we need to defend this key element of Alaska. Let me give you one example where we need to work together to defend this fishery here in Southeast. You may have read the news, a Seattle-based environmental group known for its extreme positions has filed a misguided, manipulative lawsuit arguing that Alaska's small-scale hook and line troll salmon fishery is somehow endangering the existence of Puget Sound orcas hundreds of miles away. Now, this is, in my view, a frivolous lawsuit. However, this group is weaponizing the Endangered Species Act. They're not claiming that it's the fishery near them in Washington State or the pollution in Puget Sound in Washington State. They're blaming our fishery hundreds of miles away in Southeast, and they're requesting to the judge to shut it down. We cannot let this kind of craziness stand. So I've committed to fighting against this kind of abuse of the system with everything I can to make sure the livelihoods of hardworking Alaskan families in Southeast and our economy here remain strong. And I ask you to help me to join in that fight, which doesn't get enough attention. Finally, on tourism, we are seeing a robust comeback in this vital sector following the unprecedented challenges of the pandemic. To help support that comeback, Congress recently passed my bill called the Visit America Act, which I've been working on for years, and it was primarily drafted in large part with the help of the Alaska Travel Industry Association, who's done a great job, so I thank them for that work. This legislation will elevate the priorities of the tourism sector to the highest levels of our own federal government and require a strategy across several federal agencies to boost tourism in places like Alaska and other parts of our great nation. We are seeing hundreds of millions of dollars in private sector investment being planned for tourism in Alaska as we recover from the pandemic, as well as in the aviation sector, particularly air cargo, an industry that employs thousands and in which Alaska plays a globally dominant role. So, there you have it. Literally billions, easily 10, maybe even to $20 billion in the next 5 years from the private sector and the federal government poised to be invested in our state. The main challenge, in my view, in fully realizing this potential is a federal government that can't or won't permit economic development projects in our state in a timely manner, and the lack of trained workers, Alaskan workers, to do these jobs. We have to work together to address these roadblocks to Alaska's future, as well as undertake policies that keep our children here with opportunities and good jobs. And I believe that with these investments poised to come here, good jobs should be right around the corner. Good jobs bring pride. They bring family dignity and shared purpose. Good jobs create strong families and strong communities, strong states, strong countries. I truly believe the best social program in America is a good job. We need more of them here. We need to work together on that. But we can have the best jobs, the best economy in the world, and none of it will matter if our people are suffering from the blight of sexual assault, addiction, and mental health declines. We have enormous potential as a state, but we also have to address these pressing social challenges, which is another top priority of mine. I've been focused on our huge, horrific challenge of sexual assault and domestic violence with many of you since my time as your Attorney General. I've brought elements of our state's Choose Respect strategy with me to the U.S. Senate, with a particular focus on getting pro bono legal services to survivors. Studies show that survivors of domestic violence have a much better chance of securing protective orders and breaking the cycle of violence when they're represented by a lawyer. But often, the cost of that representation is prohibitive. Working with members of both sides of the aisle in the U.S. Senate, I've been able to pass bills focusing on this issue. The Pro Bono Work to Empower and Represent Act, or the POWER Act, as we call it, was signed into law in 2018. And that has been helping combat domestic violence and sexual assault by connecting free legal services with survivors. To date, the POWER Act has reached more than 61,000 attorneys across America to help with these free legal services, and it has not cost the U.S. taxpayer one dime. So I'm proud to say that a reauthorized version of the POWER Act was recently signed into law, making this effective program permanent. Some of you might remember when we did these summits here in Alaska many years ago, the pro bono legal summits. The idea was to create an army of attorneys to help across the state. And now what we have is an army of attorneys across America who are going to help empower survivors. Another issue that has been a passion of mine is addressing the devastating impacts of addiction and its stigmatization. In the fall of 2016, I had an extremely moving meeting in Washington, D.C. with 8 Alaskan women, who my office later lovingly referred to as the Amazing 8. This was probably the most poignant, powerful meeting I've had as my time in the U.S. Senate. Each of these women had their own powerful story of facing addiction. They were incredibly courageous. They were all in recovery. The meeting opened my eyes on this issue, on many, many elements of it. And it opened my eyes to the fact that addiction is not a moral failing. People who are suffering from addiction need our help, not our judgment. As a result, I got very involved in this issue, helping pass significant legislation like the Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act to help our communities combat addiction, and holding with many of you a wellness summit a number of years ago in the Mat-Su Valley to help Alaskans more deeply understand this challenge and how to combat it. We've been making progress in bringing much needed awareness to this huge problem. But I fear that post-pandemic, we are backsliding. between 2021 and 2022, we lost more than 100,000 of our fellow Americans to overdoses. And now Alaska has the highest rate of overdose deaths per capita than any place in the country. There are many reasons for this backsliding, and I am committed more than ever to work with all of you on how to address it. But one that really incenses me is our open and porous southern border. There is a tidal wave of fentanyl being made in China coming into our country through our borders from Mexico. A staggering 4,000% increase in fentanyl seizures has occurred in just the last 3 years. 4,000%. I'm not sure what kind of politics allows for fully open borders, and I've been there on the Rio Grande at night. Our borders are open, but this is literally killing Americans. Just last week, I had a call with the Secretary of Homeland Security and again called on him and the administration to work to fix this fixable problem for America. And finally, as it relates to social issues, there's one more area that I want to work on with all of you. There's a mental health crisis across our nation that is risking destroying our young people. According to one expert, there has never been a generation of young Americans this depressed, this anxious, and this fragile. Suicides among adolescents over the previous decade have jumped 29%. The numbers in this area are staggering for teenage girls. There was a 50% increase across the country in suicide attempts during the pandemic. What's causing this? Well, I think all of you know it's a very complex issue. There's certainly not one cause. There are many factors, and the pandemic certainly didn't help. But I don't believe it's a coincidence that increases in depression rates among young people, particularly teenage girls, began to rise considerably in 2013. What happened then? Facebook acquired Instagram, and young people began to flock to the site. Then came selfies and TikTok, which wrought an invidious obsessiveness. Even those who aren't parents know that there is something horribly amiss with a whole generation who have been so addicted to their phones by big tech, and they can't seem to look up from their phones. For parents, it can feel frustrating and helpless. I'm a Republican, and I generally follow the principle of less government and more freedom. But I believe government should step in when the financial interests of big business are hurting our people, particularly our young people. Big tech's business model is to get our children hooked. And guess what? Our children are hooked. I've sponsored bills like the Kids Online Safety Act to help parents shake the vice grip that these companies have over our children. But I believe more needs to be done. I'm convinced that social media has played a nefarious role in our mental health crisis and the lack of resiliency among our youth. So I'm working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to find solutions to give parents more power over what their children are watching on their phones, like limiting. Thank you. One idea is to limit some social media for kids under 16. Now look, this is going to be a battle. When I mention this idea, you can imagine there's certain companies that hate it. Big tech special interests are very large. But again, this is the arena that Teddy Roosevelt spoke of in the mental health of our children is at stake, and working with all of you, I think we need to prevail. So finally, I want to say a few words about the larger geostrategic challenges we're facing as a nation and our role as Alaskans in confronting it. Like many of you, I deeply care about America's national security and focus a lot on these issues as your senator and as a colonel in the United States Marine Corps. We need to fully understand the broader implications of Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. We have entered a new era of authoritarian aggression led by Russia and China's dictators, who are increasingly isolated and dangerous, driven by historical grievances, paranoid about their democratic neighbors, and willing to use military force and other aggressive actions to crush the citizens of such countries. These dangerous dictators, Vladimir Putin of Russia, Xi Jinping of China, are increasingly working together to achieve their aggressive goals and are becoming increasingly emboldened and provocative. Just last week, we had a giant Chinese spy balloon violate U.S. airspace and float across our country, beginning right here in Alaska. We must wake up to the fact that this new era of authoritarian aggression will likely be with us for decades. We need to face it with strategic resolve and confidence as Americans. The United States has extraordinary advantages relative to the dictatorships of Russia and China if we are wise enough to utilize and strengthen them. Think about it. Our global network of allies, our lethal military, our world-class supplies of energy and other natural resources, our dynamic economy, and most important, in my view, our democratic values and our commitment to liberty. Alaska has an enormous role to play in ensuring that America prevails in this new era of brutal dictatorships versus democracies. Think about it. Our strategic location, our exceptional military, our world-class energy and mineral resources that can supply America and our allies for decades. In fact, our state, probably more than any other state in the Union, should be poised to play a critical role, as we have throughout our history. And in this process, we will benefit through more investment, a stronger economy, and better jobs in Alaska. Many of us know about the critical role Alaska played during World War II, including the Aleutian Island campaign, the Lend-Lease program, but less is known about our role during the Cold War. Military leaders, and certainly President Eisenhower at the time, understood Alaska's critical importance. In fact, Eisenhower, after World War II, when he was Chief of Staff in 1947, Chief of Staff of the Army, came up to Alaska to see for himself our strategic location and our Arctic tough soldiers. Because of what he saw here and what he knew as a military commander, when he became president and the Cold War started to really heat up, he initially opposed Alaska statehood. But the reason was for strategy reasons. He worried, quote, that the tremendous strategic importance of Alaska to our national defense might be compromised if the federal government didn't have complete freedom of movement and action for our military forces up here. Eventually, with the urging of many, including a young, tenacious lawyer at the Department of Interior during the Eisenhower administration, who we all know is Senator Ted Stevens, President Eisenhower changed his mind on Alaska statehood. But he and his administration and the rest of the nation understood during the Cold War just how critical we were. The Guardian of the North, the top cover for America, and investments came in that helped make the state that we know today. Between 1951 and 1955 alone, $12 billion in today's dollars came into Alaska. The distant early warning system, called the DEW line, the ballistic missile early warning sites, the Nike missile system, roads, new bases, some are expanded now, some have been closed. For example, Mile 26 south of Fairbanks was renamed Eielson Air Force Base, and its runway was extended to over 14,500 feet, the biggest runway in America at the time. Fort Greely, all of these sites came into being during this time. But it wasn't only Alaska's military that eventually helped win the Cold War. In the 1970s, the Soviet Union was desperately trying to increase its oil production in the Far East, but it didn't have the technology to drill in the permafrost. But we did. Enter Prudhoe Bay and the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System, producing at peak production of over 2 million barrels a day, which strengthened our economy here and our nation's economy and our nation's national security and energy security. So again, we played this critical role. The ingenuity of our people also helped out. The CIA actually had an operation in Alaska called Operation Washtub to recruit Alaskans to act as sleeper agents in case there was a Russian invasion. They wanted fishermen and bush pilots and prospectors and bartenders and hunters and trappers to be undercover CIA agents. In fact, many of you would probably have been perfect candidates for that program. We can play that role again in order to prevail in this new era of Chinese and Russian authoritarian aggression. And we are doing that right now in terms of our military buildup, which in our state has been very bipartisan back in the Senate, which is important. But in terms of our resources, we need to have the Biden administration recognize Alaska's huge potential. And unfortunately, many in this administration don't. In a Wall Street Journal op-ed last year titled, "Let Alaska Sell American Energy to the World," read by millions of people, North Slope Borough Mayor Harry Brower and your very own Alaska State Representative Josiah Puckatuck stated the following, quote, "Even as Russian tanks lined up on the Ukrainian border in February, the Biden administration froze U.S. drilling on federal lands and issued rules making it harder to build natural gas pipelines. We may be Inupiat Eskimos 5,000 miles away from the Washington policy machine, but we know crazy when we see it, and this is crazy." I'm glad they wrote that, because what's so frustrating to me is how the federal government just doesn't understand how crazy its policies can be, particularly as it relates to Alaska and our nation's national security. Let me give you another example. The Ambler Mining District is considered one of the most extensive sources of undeveloped zinc, copper, lead, gold, and silver anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world. America desperately needs such minerals for our renewable sector, for our economy, to compete against China, for our national security. But as you all know, we have no transportation or road to the Ambler Mining District. So the state, all of you with ADA and private investors, pursued a road including a 5-year, $5 million environmental impact statement, started during the Obama administration, completed during the Trump administration. So far, so good. But on the same day, the President Biden, hosted a summit, which I supported, on critical mineral supplies for America and fixing our supply chains. He hosted this at the White House. His Department of Interior reversed the record of decision on the Ambler Mining Road. Like Mayor Brower and Representative Pucktuck said, this is crazy. And this is part of a larger challenge that I've been fighting back in D.C. The target on Alaska. Too many officials in the Biden administration don't see Alaska as a great resource to help strengthen our country, which we all know it is. They see our state as a place to lock up and shut down instead. Now, you might have all heard me refer to this war on Alaska. Sounds a little harsh, I know, but this is what I mean by that. In 2 years, the Biden administration has issued 44 executive orders or executive actions solely focused on our state. 44 in 2 years. Just Alaska. No other state has gotten this kind of unwarranted attention, and even my Democratic Senate colleagues, when I point this out to them, are kind of stunned. I tell them, hey, if there was a Republican administration targeting your state with 44 executive actions and you came to me and asked for help, I would help. This isn't a way to treat a state in America. And to their credit, some of them are trying to help, and I really appreciate that, particularly as it relates to the most important resource development project our state is looking at right now, and that's Willow, one of the most important resource development projects probably in our state's history right now. Who knows? Maybe the President will mention his support for the Willow project tonight in his State of the Union and announce a ceasefire in his war on Alaska, but I'm not holding my breath. However, let me end where I began, on the Willow project, and an ask for all of you. As I noted, a final EIS was issued last week, and although it's not perfect, we can live with it in terms of building this project. But this project is very far from getting a final approval. A record of decision will be issued in 30 days, and the stakes for Alaska and America are huge. Think about it. 2,500 construction jobs, 75% of which are the building trades of America. It's one of their top priorities. Peak production, as I mentioned, close to 200,000 barrels a day. 17 billion in revenues for the feds, for the state, for the North Slope Borough. Highest environmental standards and lowest greenhouse gas emissions of any major project like this in the world. And broad-based support from so many Alaskans, particularly the Alaska Native leaders and Alaska Native citizens who live in the region. But the battle is going to be ferocious over the next 30 days when the record of decision is finalized. Just read the press. After the announcement of this final EIS last week, every major lower 48 environmental group in America, with their budgets in the tens of millions of dollars and their army of lobbyists and activists, said publicly they are pulling out all the stops to kill this project. These groups have high-ranking allies within the Biden administration and the national media who share their goal of killing Willow and shutting down key elements of Alaska's economy. So we need to fight back, all of us, in the arena. In Alaska, Willow is a bipartisan issue. Senator Murkowski, Representative Politola, who, by the way, supports Willow, and I have requested a meeting with the president to make our case. Some of you know I've done this before with the president in the Oval Office. 2 days after I pitched him on Willow, 18 months ago, his team came back to me and said, the president supports the project. I hope President Biden remembers this and keeps his word to Alaskans. And if we get this meeting, I will respectfully make this argument that the president and his administration have been going to places like Saudi Arabia, begging for oil, have even lifted sanctions on Venezuela, a terrorist state, to produce more oil for America. But you won't let Alaskans do the same? In the wise words of Josiah and Mayor Brower, crazy. So here's the ask. In 2017, after my address to this body, then Lieutenant Governor Malott and Speaker Edgman handed me a unanimous, bipartisan, bicameral resolution from the Alaska legislature. It was from all of you. And that, in essence, it said this: we have an opportunity at long last to get the 1002 area of ANWR open. Senator, go get it done in the Congress of the United States. I looked at all of you, said roger that, and we succeeded. And when I say we, I mean all of us. We succeeded because of support from this body, from Democrats, from Republicans, from independents, all people across the state who spoke with one unified Alaskan voice on this issue. In order for the Biden administration to approve an economically viable final record of decision in the next 30 days, they will need to hear from all of you. So I'm respectfully asking for a call to action. Please draft up another resolution and pass it so we can show people in D.C., who, by the way, certain congressmen are claiming Alaskans and Alaska Natives don't want the Willow project, so we can show them and say, that's not correct. So we need you to call the White House. You're all good politicians. Use your connections. We need to make some noise for the betterment of our state and our country. I'm starting to do this and trying to do this in my own capacity. I was on national TV, a national TV show last week, encouraging all Americans who care about national security and energy security to call the White House, to call the Department of Interior, to say you support the Willow project. Now, granted, it was on Fox News, so I'm pretty sure that not all Americans were watching, but you get my point. We need to do that across all sectors of our economy, our state, our country, and politics. And if we do get an economically viable record of decision in the next 30 days, then Conoco and its strong Alaska workforce will immediately begin construction. And we know what's going to happen next. All the powerful lower 48 environmental groups with their hundreds of millions of dollars and their elite Wall Street lawyers will immediately file a lawsuit for an injunction in Alaska's federal district court to stop Alaskan workers from working and to once again have the courts kill the Willow project. So I will be filing an amicus brief in this critical lawsuit. In it, the federal judge will be ruling on whether Willow is in Alaska's and America's interests. With all due respect to the judge, as a life-tenured judge cloistered in her chamber, she doesn't know the answer of what's in the public interest, and certainly groups like the Center for Biological Diversity and Greenpeace don't know what's in the public interest. despite their power and influence in the media. But here's the thing. We do. We do. We know it's in the public interest. We are elected officials in our great republic. We are citizens in this republic. In the arena, that is literally our job, to discern what the public interest is. So I hope all of you, every single one of you, can sign on to this amicus brief when we're in litigation and tell the judge that Willow is unequivocally in the public interest for our great state, for our great country, and let Alaskans finally build it. So I want to conclude by thanking all of you again for everything you do. We know that there are many, many reasons why we love our state, our landscape, our people, our sense of adventure, our freedom. We are unique. We are not like so many places in the lower 48, wrung out, dull, overcrowded, polluted. By and large, we aren't too divided by our politics, our religion, our origins. We work together when times are tough, and we share when times are good. We are a state generous of spirit, and that's because of people like you, people in this room. If we stick together, always remembering that our future rests on continuing to create a place with a sense of purpose, where freedom of spirit, adventure, legend, and community are interwoven, the possibilities, not only for our state, but for our country, are endless. America is not fully America without Alaska. We have much work to do for our fellow Alaskans, and we have so much to offer for our fellow Americans, because our state embodies so much of what is the best of America. I look forward to continuing that work together with all of you. Thanks again for the invite to say a few words, actually more than a few words. God bless our great state and our great nation. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Senator Keel, did you have a question? Senator Keel, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Sullivan, for joining us today. You spoke to the icebreaker.
Yeah.
Headed this way. I know there was a hiccup.
Yeah.
Just as coastal communities around Alaska is prepared to host fast response cutters and their crews families, the capital city is anxious, is eager
Good.
to host that icebreaker. Can you give us an update on where we are and when we are?
Great. Well, look, thanks for the question. And I think some of you know this has been an issue that and again, this is very collective you want to talk about a bipartisan issue, is that we need icebreakers in America's Arctic. We have 2 icebreakers for our country, heavy icebreakers, a home port in Seattle, and one is broken. So we have 1 icebreaker. Russia has 54, and many of which are nuclear-powered, weaponized. I think Singapore has more icebreakers than we do. And I think last time I looked, they're on the equator or near it. So this has been a priority. As you know, we're building icebreakers now. Senator Murkowski, Congressman Young, and I, we got authorization and appropriation to start building icebreakers. But it's taken a long time. It's down on the Gulf Coast where they're building icebreakers. So we had this idea, started with the Trump administration, continued with the Biden administration to cover the gap while we're building them to purchase a commercial icebreaker. There were some kind of in the global market. So the Coast Guard went to work on that, and we went to work on it through legislation. So in the Coast Guard bill, I was able to get authorization to purchase this icebreaker. We got authorization to take NOAA land to move it here in Juneau for Coast Guard land. And we asked the Coast Guard, well, maybe ask is too polite of a word. We kind of demanded of the Coast Guard, hey, if you're going to purchase one, it needs to be in Alaska. Needs to be in Alaska. So every now and then you can leverage things like confirmation or promotions of Coast Guard officers, and that's what I did. So we're not moving forward on any more promotions in the Coast Guard until we get this study of where you're going to put the icebreaker in our state. And then, yeah, well, it took a while. So they did a big study. That's what they do. They're the experts. And they came back, and I'm sure you've all heard, they said the place we want to put it, we think strategically is most important, is Juneau, Alaska. So that's where the Coast Guard is. Great for Juneau, great for Southeast, but I think it's great for Alaska in general. It's actually great for America to have an icebreaker, the first one in the Arctic. So that's where we've been. We lined up during the appropriations authorization process, like I said, authorization to buy it, authorization to move land here in Juneau to get the Coast Guard to have that. That passed, so that's happening. Senator Murkowski was able to work appropriation language, and then some of you may have heard about, and then the president had it in his budget. So as you guys know as legislators, that's kind of you kind of checkmated people, right? Authorization, appropriation, president's budget. We thought for sure it was going to be in the omnibus. We were following it, tracking it. At the end of the year, that was a $1.7 trillion, 4,000-page omnibus bill that we had 48 hours to read, okay? I can't stand these omnibus bills for that reason, because you don't have time to read it. But we were tracking it to make sure, literally, this is no kidding, in the middle of the night, right before the omnibus was published, somebody pulled that appropriation up. Very frustrating, very disappointing. Since that time, I've talked to the OMB director, I've talked to the Commandant of the Coast Guard, I've talked to the Homeland Security Secretary who's in charge of the Coast Guard, all pressing that the President needs to re-put this in his budget so we can get it done. They can't tell me what's going to be in the President's budget, but I would just say those phone calls were very constructive. So I think it's going to be back in, hopeful, pretty sure it will be, and then we just need to re-attack it again. So it's a hiccup, but the Commandant of the Coast Guard, the entire Coast Guard are fully committed to getting that done, and I am too, and I know all of you really care about it in a bipartisan way, so we'll just re-attack it, and we'll get it done. I'm very confident of that. By the way, one other thing. Coast Guard said estimates about $400 million for infrastructure here in Juneau. I mean, and we'll work to get that. And a crew of about over 200. And think about that. They bring their families. I mean, this will be a giant economic engine for Juneau and Southeast, and it'll be great for our national security. So huge win. We just got to keep pressing it, and you have my commitment to do that.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Cronk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Sullivan, as someone who grew up in rural Alaska, I watched firsthand as the federal government imposed national refuges and national parks upon the people of rural Alaska with really no respect for the local people. So with the recent ruling making by the National Park Service that takes away the rights of Alaskans, what can we do to help?
Thanks, Mike. Look, it's a huge problem, and it's frustrating because it's kind of this ping pong when certain administrations are in power. This was President Obama, and now President Biden. They make this move to have the federal government usurp our ability to manage fish and wildlife. To me, this isn't even a close question. You look at the statehood pact, you look at ANILCA, the state of Alaska is supposed to manage fish and game across the whole state, including on federal lands, refuges, park lands, Fish and Wildlife Service lands. So you might remember during the Obama administration, they did this almost identical for Fish and Wildlife Service lands. I was able to use what's called a Congressional Review Act. It's a law that rescinds a reg. And you might remember we got that passed. Not easy, because it was a specific Alaska reg that the Obama administration usurped power from us on fish and wildlife management on federal lands that we were supposed to manage, and we reversed it. President Trump signed it, passed, bipartisan, by the way. Some Democrat senators voted for Alaska on this because they didn't want this happening in their state. So now the National Park Service is at it again. And this is a frustration of mine because the director of the National Park Service, when he went through his confirmation process, I put a hold on him. And I put a hold on him for a bunch of reasons, to educate him. And I worked with some of my Democratic colleagues who really wanted me to lift the hold. So I lifted the hold on the condition that he took a NILCA training and that his senior leadership all took a NILCA training. They didn't even know what a NILCA was, right? So they did that. And then I said, the other commitment you need to make to me is if you're going to do anything that singularly focuses on my state, you need to call me and let me know and let my constituents know and let Alaska Fish and Game know. Yes, Senator, I'll do that. Okay, I lift my hold. Well, he didn't do that. So you may have heard I gave him a phone call 2 weeks ago after we read about this, and it wasn't a very pleasant phone call for him because he didn't keep his commitments. So what they've said, I think he's already talked to Doug Vincent Lang, but I made the request for them to start over. Rescind this reg that they put out and start over by working with us, with all of you, with our Department of Fish and Game, or Division of Fish and Game here. So we'll see. It's frustrating. It's illegal. And what we don't have to do is go sue these guys again. But I think it's very clear they don't have the legal authority to do it. They get pushed by certain lower 48 groups, the same groups, by the way, they're against Willow and things. So we'll keep you posted on it, but he heard loud and clear from me, and I was quite upset because people are supposed to keep their word. And in my view, he didn't. And so we're on it, and I know you guys care about it. If the legislature can weigh in on that one, that should not be partisan at all. We get to manage our land. That's like part of the deal. It's statehood. And you have certain federal administrations who always want to press it. And we need to fight back against it. So I appreciate your leadership on this and asking the question.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hughes. Did you have a question, Senator Hughes?
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Sullivan, for being here with us today. Yesterday, I had an opportunity to speak with you, and you briefed us a little bit on what happened regarding the spy balloon.
Yeah.
And there was concern about our not realizing it through the media till midweek last week when I believe it was over Montana. Can you share with us, I think it'd be reassuring to the public and the members in this room, as far as our military's awareness of the situation here in Alaska?
Thank you, Shelley, and it was good meeting with you guys yesterday. So it's kind of it's a little frustrating because I was briefed by the NORTHCOM commander who's in charge of all the defenses here, the Secretary of the Air Force, and then our great Alaskan men and women at Alaska Command. Some of you are very familiar with this. Some of you were part of it at one point in your military careers. And, we got briefed, and they said, well, you can't really talk about some of this publicly. And then you look in the press the last couple of days, and they're all talking about it. So I'm trying to figure out what I can say and what I can't say. But let me just mention a few things that I think are really important takeaways for us in particular. First, our men and women at Alaska Command did an exceptional job. Okay, exceptional. Whatever you're reading in the press, like they were on this, they were tracking this. They gave options to National Command authorities very early on way before it was making any news. They're the best in the world, right? And I've been asked, well, did they intercept it? My response, because I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say, is, well, what do you think? Kind of gives you the answer. But they're really good. And the big questions are, well, I think one revelation is that we just need, it's kind of to the point of my remarks, we just need to wake up to this big challenge with the Chinese Communist Party. One of the many things they do is they act aggressively, but they lie, right? I mean, I think they're still saying that this was a weather balloon, right, that blew off course. It wasn't a weather balloon. It was a spy balloon. We know that. Okay, so the fact that Xi Jinping and his buddies are all saying it was that's just not true. And they have a habit of doing this. Some of you might remember President Obama and Xi Jinping were standing together in the Rose Garden in 2015, and Xi Jinping declared to the President of the United States, we're not militarizing the South China Sea, we're not building up any of the reefs there well, that was just a bald-faced lie, right? So these guys lie. And they're lying about this. So that's number one. We just got to be aware of that. That's a big challenge of ours. Number two is, and this one's really coming out in the press, and hopefully it's going to be transparent. I'm going to press for hearings on it, but I have my own views. How often is this happening? Right? How often is this happening? Because almost anything, one of the reasons we're so strategic, almost anything that's going to come to the lower 48, whether it's a hypersonic missile or a cruise missile or a balloon, guess where it's going to transverse first? Us. That's another reason why we're so strategic. And if this has happened a lot, boy, oh boy, I think we got to make sure that we're setting the policies very clear to them. Hey, dictatorships like this, press, they probe, they look for weakness. I think they feel that they found a weakness. I think we need to very clearly determine to them that we're going to reestablish deterrence. What does that mean? We shouldn't allow Chinese communist spy balloons to be violating our airspace, period. My view is next time they do it or come close, we should shoot it down. And we certainly have the capability, our men and women in our state, to do that. So to me, those are the issues I'm going to be pressing when I get back to D.C. But the men and women who protect us, literally, at Alaska Command, on this issue did fantastic. And some of the things you saw in the lower 48 that happened later with regard to this was plans and options that they devised here that were later used by other elements of our military in other parts of our country. So you can be very proud of what they did, how quickly they were on it, and how professionally they were tracking this and protecting us, and then waiting from higher headquarters on options that they presented, and that, in my view, they're probably going to have to present again. And but this also goes to this issue of, hey, if we're protecting the whole country, which we are there gaps in our defense systems that we need to address up here? I think the answer to that is yes. And I think we got to get on that. And as your senator on the Armed Services Committee, I'm going to definitely do that. So thanks for the question. I know there's been a lot of speculation on it, but men and women that we call our neighbors here in Alaska who do this for a living did exceptional.
Thank you, Senator. Our last question will be Representative Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Sullivan, thank you for supporting additional investments into the child care sector.
Yeah.
As you know, the child care crisis in Alaska is one of the top obstacles to economic recovery in our state, and most importantly, it's hurting kids and families. I would love to hear your perspective on what we can do next on child care to ensure families are taken care of and parents can get back to work. Thank you.
Well, it's a great question, and it's an issue that I know is being talked about in the legislature. Kind of goes to this broader issue, in my view, of when I mention, hey, we want to make sure our kids and families can stay here, right, with opportunities, not just jobs, but in other kind of supporting resources that can help strong families. And as you may have seen, this is an issue that I've focused on a lot in the Congress. I just reintroduced my Child Care Workforce and Facilities Act. That's with Senator Klobuchar from Minnesota. And the whole point of what we're trying to do there is we're looking at what we call deserts. I'm not sure desert is the right term for Alaska, but areas of the country that really lack kind of fundamental basic child care services and options, and try to focus on those first. We're one of those. So that's something that I'm doing in a bipartisan way back in the Senate on this issue, which I know is an important one for families, but I also think it's an important one for strong economies. So it's something that I'm going to continue to focus on. Appreciate the question.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan. It's been a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thanks again. Okay. Thanks, you guys. Thank you.
Madam Majority Leader Giesel.
Mr. President, I move that the joint session be adjourned.
Without objection, the session is adjourned.
The House will stand at ease.
Wow, let me tell you folks, I hope I got this switched over quick enough so that you guys don't have to listen to music for too long. I currently got it playing in my ears, and going by the dialogue I see down below on my screen here, we are definitely hearing me loud and clear. That was State Senator Dan Sullivan giving his State of our Union address. Pretty grim listening to what he had to say. You guys all heard Mary Patullo got us Willow Project released. Look what the Democrats did for Alaska. Look what Mary did for us. Listening to Senator Dan Sullivan and what he had to say about the Willow Project and what is happening there, it is important that we Alaskans do our part, and we get on the phone and we call Washington and we call these legislators down there and we let them know exactly like we're supposed to be doing here in Juneau, and let them know what we think about these projects and that they need to get going and they need to get into operation. He brought Ambler up as another one, and he also brought up the Pebble Mine, but not by name. He only just brought up the report that just came out that they'll have the supposedly final decision sometime in the next 30 days on where that's going to stand at. Again, up in the air. How many times have we heard that about this project? It is getting ridiculous. The lawsuits that continue to keep happening. I think Alaskans need to do exactly what they're supposed to do and stand up and do what we should have done a very, very long time ago. And that is beat the drum, flip the middle finger to the federal government, and tell them that we are done with their political games that they have going on, and it is time to start doing their jobs and working for all Alaskans. And bear with me here. We're supposed to have Senator Dan Sullivan supposed to have a press availability happening right now. And as soon as that gets started, I will pop that up here on the screen. A lot of gaslighting going on there. A lot of gaslighting. I mean, he openly admits that Alaska was tracking the China spy balloon that was flying across our state. He outright admits this is a spy balloon. It's not no weather balloon. So whatever you may have heard on mainstream media, whether it's right or wrong, we'll take Senator Dan Sullivan at his word here. This was a spy balloon by China. They could have shot it out of the sky while it was crossing over Alaska. They didn't. They let it go all across Canada. They didn't do anything there neither in Canada. And then they let it traverse all over throughout the United States, hovering over military and nuclear strategic sites throughout our continental United States, doing whatever that spy balloon was doing. Well, it's really funny watching how they manipulate and twist the wording and show what they want to show. Oh, I see a screen there showing that it looks like maybe Dan Sullivan might be coming up here real soon with the press availability. Let me make sure I got everything on the other screen right to be able to capture that. And we'll make sure it pops up as soon as it comes available there. And looks like I may have it all set up and ready to go. Yes, I do. And since I haven't moved anything on that screen, hopefully everything will line up perfectly like it's supposed to. So again, it was a lot of gaslighting. I do appreciate Senator Dan Sullivan when it comes to the two senators that represent Alaska there in D.C. He is the only one that is working for us when it comes to all of them that are representing us down there in D.C. as in Congress and Senate. He is still the only one that represents all of us. Senator Lisa Murkowski is already trying to do things down there. That is to ratify the Constitution of the United States to make abortion legal throughout all 50 states. I mean, this is the type of subversion that she is doing behind the scenes. She claims she's all for protecting the Willow Project, but only if it's to her advantage to make that happen. She's against Pebble Mine. It's going to destroy everything if Pebble was to occur. Well, that is what we're told to listen to, and what she says this is the way things are going to be. We really do need to wake up, Alaska, and pay attention to what is going on a local level and also on a national level. As I was saying a little bit earlier, you know, we need to take and flip the bird to the federal government and start developing up our resources. We have a proven track record of doing it the best of anywhere in the world. I'll repeat that. We are the most secure, ecologically minded. We are the best in the world when it comes to developing up our resources and stuff that we are needing in this new technology. They claim the green generation is going to help change everything. Well, the minerals that are needed for that are here in Alaska. We could be the resource developer that mines it all and gets it into the market, and America becomes the #1 producer for all of these new technologies that are coming out there. Instead, we're farming it off to places like India and China, where in other places that they're using child labor inside of mining pits in conditions that these children are dying very young from the complete castration of the chemicals that they are forced to be working in, the pollutants, the stuff here in America that they would literally have a meltdown on if it was allowed to occur here. Oh, as long as they don't see it, those same greenies that are shutting everything down here, they're more than happy to let it happen elsewhere in the world. They don't care if there is child labor, child slave labor doing the work. I mean, why would they? Our U.S. government is one of the biggest child traffickers in the entire world, our United States, and we don't do nothing about that. I mean, even Alaska, OCS, I mean, whether you like it or not, they are some of the biggest child traffickers that we have in Alaska. And these are issues that need to be addressed and looked at and quit being skirted around and quit calling it by other names or other things that it really isn't. Grand Jury of Alaska, the Alaska Grand Jury, this is one of the things they're investigating right now. And this is why the judicial branch of Alaska is trying to shut the grand juries down. This is why they've got the big fight going on. This is why judges are unilaterally changing rules, taking the powers away that the grand jury was granted to them by us, we Alaskans. And one judge took that all away. Didn't even let it go through a rules committee. Only 3 out of the 13 in that panel even got to have a say, and 2 of them outright said it was unconstitutional, but they allowed it to happen anyways. All right, it looks like it's getting really close to him having the press briefing starting there. They are all milling around in the room. Let me go ahead and get them popped up here on the screen here and make sure that everything is working hunky-dory. And we'll put them underneath me. There we go. And there we are. And we'll shrink myself down here just a little bit, see what we can do to get that to happen. But yes, thank you guys all for being here today. If you have not liked and shared this video, why not? You guys really are slowing down out there. You need to get it done. And share this video right now, so that all Alaskans can partake in this. This is the press availability now with Senator Dan Sullivan. That will be beginning here in just a little bit. And there we go. Get my face out of there for the moment so that we all can be on the same screen that I'm looking at. And right at this time, we're just waiting on Senator Dan Sullivan to get into the room to have the press availability conference that he was promised, at least we were all promised would have happened after this had occurred. And again, Senator Dan Sullivan, he did a really good job compared to Lisa Murkowski. Said that will be coming up here real soon, I'm sure. And don't forget, we've got tomorrow, you got testimonies being taken starting at 3:30 in the Senate Education Committee for SB 52, Senate Bill 52. That is the student base allocation. They're talking about increasing the base student allocation by $1,000 per student. That'd be roughly $138 million that they would be adding to the budget with no accountability for that extra money. We are already the worst in the nation at nearly double to triple the cost, depending on where you look at in the state, compared to anywhere else in the nation, to provide the worst in the nation compared to anywhere else out there. If you have yet, again, to like and share this video, do that right now and take a moment and get that done. And make sure that the volume is on their feed, so that I know that when they go to actually start talking, I take them off of mute and you guys can all hear them loud and clear. And but you can find this video right now on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, all at Politadick, and also on Facebook at Politadick Unfiltered. It is our one uncensored video channel that we keep running on Facebook. It has never gotten a red flag. It has never been harassed by Facebook, other than when they say music copyright from thanks to gavel to gavel. But other than that, they does really good on that channel. It gets a better reach than most times, than sometimes Politadick does with 4,000, or let's take that back, 5,300 plus some followers that we now have here. Thank you guys. I appreciate every single one of you. It has been a wonderful 5 years bringing you the news here in Alaska and covering what mainstream media likes to ignore. I wouldn't be surprised that the State of the Union address by the state senator Dan Sullivan didn't even air on regular TV. That would not surprise me. But I have not looked to see if they did send out an actual notice saying they broadcasted it. So I could be wrong when making a false assumption here. But in a few hours, you will find this also on Rumble at rumble.com/Politadick. And while you're on Rumble, or if you are not on Rumble, please go sign up just long enough to subscribe to Politadick, and so that we can grow our channel. We are something, I think, at 58 followers now on Rumble. Once we reach 100, we are able to live stream to them directly. And we want to stop having to wait hours or maybe sometimes days to actually get the broadcast moved over to their channel. We want to make sure that we can stream to them live and unfiltered and uncensored, like we have happening at YouTube and here at Facebook. They throw out copyright warnings all the time. They'll shut down my videos on Facebook. On YouTube, they'll just claim some misinformation, and if they don't agree with what you had to say against it, they just ban your video, and then you also get banned from being able to do anything on YouTube for a week or longer, depending on how many infractions you get. You can be removed. I do my best to try to keep that from happening, but every time it's an election year, they seem to find something that says there was some election misinformation. I mean, just our own candidates that were running for office talking to a group of people at a presentation talking about who they were and the races they were in was flagged by YouTube as being going against their community policies, something about political information being incorrect and false. And I'm saying it that way because I'm trying to avoid any of the red flags that would cause their internal bots that watch this stuff from flagging this video. And if we sign up on rumble.com and go to Politadick and subscribe to us, we'll be able to live stream things like that and not have to worry about it being censored or taken down or finding ourselves completely deplatformed because of the far left political views that YouTube and Google have out there when they show for their political biases in their searches and what they allow to be streamed on the platform at YouTube. And it's amazing they get all upset with Elon Musk at Twitter and being a billionaire and all the things that he does and Tesla and those good things. But it looks like their actual press is sitting there taking the microphone. Let me listen real quick. Turn it up here on my end so I can hear a little bit better. Oh, nope, he's just doing a microphone test. Okay, so nothing important happening yet. But Senator Dan Sullivan is about ready to come up, and he is going to give the press briefing. And in fact, it's time I think we change this here real quick and to the new display for up on top. And yes, I know it already exists. There we go. Now it added on to the end of that. You should be able to see press availability. We'll do a couple of little other things here. It looks like now my other logos and stuff are now all a little bit too big for the actual new writings that we have. We'll adjust them also. But again, if you haven't liked and shared, please do that. We did get to listen to Senator Dan Sullivan here just a little bit ago, talking about the state of the Union of Alaska and our state in it, and pretty much gaslighting. Here we go.
I just finished my annual speech to the legislature, and won't bore you with the major regurgitation, but 3 areas that I talked about, my areas of focus, which I'm hopeful, I think fairly confident that they're going to be bipartisan areas of focus. One is the Alaska economy. That's always been my #1 area of focus during my time in the Senate. And as I mentioned, there's a number of things that are coming together, private sector and from the federal government, that in my view are going to be, we're on the cusp of billions and billions of dollars of investment. That's exciting. We're not there yet, but it's quite exciting. As I mentioned, these aren't pie-in-the-sky ideas anymore. These are literally on the verge of happening. The federal dollars are coming from the infrastructure, broadband dollars, military dollars, things like that. So that's #1. #2, I talked about, and I think those of you who have kind of covered my time in the Senate and here as Attorney General in particular, some of the big social challenges that we have in our state, in our country. As I mentioned, you have the best jobs, best economy in the world, but if you're suffering from serious social challenges like our high rates of domestic violence, our high rates of addiction. One that's really grabbed my attention, which is the challenges on mental health, especially among our youth, then it kind of all doesn't matter, right? So there's a number of things that we're focused on back in DC, but I wanted to highlight those. A number of these are all about, as you probably saw, hopefully in my remarks, kind of putting on my hands saying, hey, how can we work together on these? A lot of these are state, federal, local. And then the one that's a little bit more federal, at the end I talked about the significant challenges that we're facing as a nation in terms of national security. And that's the new era of authoritarian aggression with Russia and China's dictators in particular. As I mentioned, I think this is going to be a challenge for America for a long time. And Alaska is poised to play a really, really important role, probably more than any other state in the country. Our strategic location, our lethal and growing military, and importantly, our resources that can help our nation economy, our nation's national defense, and compete against Russia and China and some of the other authoritarian regimes like Iran that we are focused on. The frustration, of course, that I mentioned is that on the resource side, the Biden administration is not recognizing our state as having that capacity. I mentioned the 44 executive orders and actions in the last 2 years, which is a real frustration. But at the end, I focused on Willow. And I made an ask of the legislature to help us in the next 30 days. As I mentioned, it's going to be really, really critical. We're either going to get this record of decision, it's going to let us move forward, or we're going to lose a gigantic opportunity for our state, our country, which, as I mentioned, makes no strategic sense. You can't ask the Saudis and the Venezuelans to produce more oil for America and deny it at home with the highest standards in the world, our great workforce. So I made the ask of legislators to help me on that. They've done it before, both in terms of resolutions, in terms of reaching out to the White House, getting involved in the litigation that's undoubtedly going to happen very soon. And I'm hopeful that they do that. They've done it before, as I mentioned, on ANWR, and we got that done in 2017, the unanimous resolution from the legislature, and it helps. It helps. And the reason it helps, you have members of Congress in the Senate, in the House, who come to the floor and say, oh, Alaskans don't want this. Alaska Native people don't want this. They have no idea what they're talking about. Senator Murkowski and I and Congresswoman Peltola have pushed back on that, but to get the legislature to unanimously approve something and join this lawsuit that's coming, I think would be powerful. And then I'll just ask for you guys, which is highly unusual, but you know, the Willow press, in my view, at the national level, I gave a speech on the Senate floor, we can send it to you if you want, last Thursday, just really decrying the coverage, which I thought at the national level was ridiculous. And it was ridiculous because all they do is, the press, national press, they quote the lower 48, far left environmental groups that want to kill Willow, and they don't actually allow the voices of Alaskans to be heard, especially the Native people, the leadership in our Native communities, who overwhelmingly support this project. Yeah, you can always find one or two people who you can quote against it, but I think as Alaska media, this is going to be a big story for the next 30 days. I think it's going to be important for you guys to lead the way on that, because the national media is, in my view, incredibly biased against this project, and their reporting and their quotes of, you know, all the usual suspects who want to shut down our state are the prominent features in all the articles, and they don't quote Alaskans. They don't quote the unions. They don't quote the North Slope Borough. I mean, it's frustrating. So take a look at that, but it's an issue. We can send you the speech I gave on Thursday that highlights the frustration we have as Alaskans. Anyways, that's my opening. Thanks very much again to be here. It's good to see a lot of you guys, and I'll let Ben handle the Q&A.
Great. So we'll start with those that RSVP'd and then everybody else. So James Brooks from the Alaska Beacon.
Senator, asking a question on behalf of my colleague, Gareth Rosen, for the Alaska Beacon. She's writing about cross-border relations between Alaska and Russia, scientists who have had research curtailed, Alaska natives who have been unable to travel to visit family, and to some degree, border security operations as well. How do you see relations along the border right now, and what would it take to improve those?
You want me to grab that one? So James, that's an important question. I can't say I'm an expert in that area. I mean, we can actually look into it. I haven't heard of a lot of problems, but I would imagine, the trade relationship obviously is really drying up. We've put sanctions on all kinds of Russian goods. We've banned imports of Russian energy. We're finally banning imports of Russian fish. As you know, they banned imports of American seafood in 2014. So the economic relationship is, of course, tanking. I think that's an important part of our strategy. I think the cross-border relationship got a little more tense after the Russians who were fleeing the draft took that boat over to St. Lawrence Island. So, but I always believe that if you can still have people-to-people contacts, it's important. I know it's important to our communities, but I'm fully supportive of the economic and energy sanctions we have against Russia. But if there's a way to continue that on the people-to-people contact side, I think that's important. I have not heard specific examples of where it's been a problem in my office, but if there are problems, we can look into it. I do think even the people-to-people side, though, got a little more stressed by that, by those Russians who were fleeing the draft and ended up in Alaska at St. Lawrence Island.
Thank you. Jeff Landfield, Alaska Landmine.
All right, Senator, you mentioned infrastructure money and
Yeah.
projects, and I wanted to ask, I think the last big thing we did in the state was Red Dog, and the last big road was in the 80s, and big road was the Parks Highway in the 70s, and we can't build the Cabata Bridge, the Juneau Access Road got canceled, PIC is on state land. It just seems like we don't do anything anymore, and why do you think we're going to start doing things?
Well, and do I need the mic, or can you guys hear me?
Just for the TV.
Okay. So, Jeff, I agree with you 100%. It's one of my biggest frustrations as not just Alaska Senator, but before that DNR Commissioner. It's hard to get big things off the ground here. That's why I put so much emphasis in this speech on Willow, because I'm trying to make sure people, a lot of Alaskans do understand the importance of that project, but not everybody. And what I really wanted to do in the speech was lay out, this is a hugely important strategic project on the scale of Red Dog, on the scale, in my view, of Prudhoe, the biggest NPRA project that we have. And here's the other thing about that. The people who are doing exploration in NPRA are very confident that there's more willows. And I think this has a huge, important impact for our state. So that would be on federal land. Now, as you know, it's been in permitting in one form or another since the late 1990s. That's when Conoco picked up these leases. And every time it's gone through permitting, it's passed with flying colors. So if you can't get a project like this done, that's so important economically, environmentally, national security perspective, it's going to be frustrating. So as you saw in that in my remarks there, I'm all in on this. But with regard to other major projects, you heard me mention it. A passion of mine, as I think you know in the Senate, it was when I was DNR Commissioner, is fixing our broken permitting system. at the federal government level. It took 20 years, if you include the litigation, to permit the Kensington mine right here in Southeast. 20 years. I mean, that's insane. And we have that everywhere. So one of my big areas of focus has been, continues to be, and will always be fixing our broken permitting system where we don't have efficient, timely, certain permitting. And we're so out of step with the rest of the world. You look at other industrialized democracies, Canada, Germany, Australia, on all these kind of resource development projects and road projects, they get things permitted 2 to 3 years. We do it 9, 10, 11, 15. And it really hurts us. So it's a threat. I mentioned it in there. We have these federal dollars coming for federal projects, but if we can't get out of our own way in terms of permitting, it's going to be a giant missed opportunity. But this Willow project is on scale, in my view, to be one of the biggest, most important resource development projects in our state's history. And maybe we can break that unfortunate trend that you talked about not getting any big things done in the last couple decades. This could be a change of course. That's why I've emphasized it. That's why I've asked every Alaska legislator to help us on it, not just in terms of the resolution, but the litigation that's inevitably coming very soon.
Sean McGuire, Anchorage Daily News.
Hi, Senator.
Hey, Sean.
Senator, I'm curious that the Biden administration has backed the Willow project in court when it has been opposed to other resource projects on the North Slope. Was there an understanding or some sort of quid pro quo with the Biden administration that the Alaska congressional delegation's support of the Infrastructure and Jobs Act would then result in the Biden administration supporting the Willow project?
No. I mean, at least not with me. No. We try to get them to support every project. I did press the President of the United States about 18 months ago in the Oval Office on Willow. Gave him a handout on it. We were supposed to be there talking about tourism. And that was after he signed our legislation. You might remember when we fixed that problem with the cruise ship issue with Canada, and we changed the law. And I changed the subject and pressed him on Willow. He didn't know about it, but, you know, he was respectful. I was respectful. They came back and said they were going to support it. So I hope they keep their word. That's very important. The battle, as I mentioned, the final EIS that we got last week, they narrowed it significantly, 5 pads to 3 pads. It's quite a significant narrowing. But the Department of Interior put out a statement last week saying, it was very unusual. BLM put out a pretty good statement. The Department of Interior, which BLM is part of, put out a broader statement saying, we're not sure. We have very big concerns. That's very strange, and it's troubling. And we have told them, if you narrow this further to 2 pads, you're essentially killing it. And we won't view it as a narrowing, we'll view it as a killing of the project. They know that. ConocoPhillips has also put a statement out to that effect. But I press them on every significant resource infrastructure project that we can get done. I've exhibited, you know, respectfully but regularly my frustration with these 44 executive orders and executive actions. But at least in my world, there's never been anything remotely close to a quid pro quo.
Becky from the Associated Press.
Hi, Senator.
Hello, Becky.
On Willow, you mentioned the Interior statement. If this, in theory, is supposed to be a non-political decision,
Yeah.
what good does it do, in your mind, for you to try to personally lobby the president? And can you state in maybe stronger or clearer terms when you talk about this being one of the most important resource development projects in our state's history,
Sure.
what you see that to be?
Yeah. Let me respectfully flip the question on its head. So, the way it works in our federal system, is that the professional staff of BLM and Interior and the men and women, most of whom, by the way, work here, they did that final supplemental EIS. Okay? It's very detailed, very scientific oriented. Now, the Trump administration did it as well. Same thing. Professional staff, the men and women who work for BLM, primarily here in Alaska, who do a great job, by the way, in my view, they made that supplemental final EIS. It just came out last week. It's very big. It's very detailed. What is very normal in the process is that once you get a final EIS, you have 30 days to do a record of decision. 30 days. That's not a lot of time. So what almost always happens in the federal government's permitting process is the final EIS, or I'm sorry, the record of decision 30 days after the final EIS almost always reflects the final EIS. Because you don't have, in 30 days, you don't have a chance to change it or do a deep dive on the science and data, okay? So let me give you a very good example of that. When the Trump administration, as you know, denied the Pebble 404 permits. Okay? That was a really big deep dive with the science, with the professionals, mostly based in Alaska, and the Trump administration came out and said, we are denying this. You don't meet the standard. 30 days later, the record of decision just stamped it. Same thing. Okay? That is very normal. What would be very political, hugely political, and I hope you write this, is that if you have a final EIS, it was just submitted by the scientists, and 30 days later, you go from 3 pads to 2. That would mean the political people in the White House killed it. That would not be science-based at all. And that's what I am worried about. We know that there are senior Biden administration officials who want to kill this project, 100%. And they are working with their allies in the lower 48. Read the press. You guys have been writing about it. They've said the radical far left environmental groups, they have said this is their #1 issue they want to kill. So if they kill it in the next 30 days, we will know that that was a political, not a science-based judgment. And I will hope you write that, because we're worried that they're going to do this for political reasons. The professionals in the federal government have spoken. And they spoke in the final supplemental EIS. Now, all we're trying to do is get the Biden administration to say, stamp that approved. And what's happening in the battle royale right now is all the political power and the major influence of these groups. And trust me, they have enormous political influence on politicians, on the president, on the White House. They are trying to politicize it. So if it gets changed, it will be raw politics and nothing to do with science. And that would be shockingly bad for Alaska and America. And by the way, strategically stupid. Again, this president has gone to Saudi Arabia to beg the Saudis for more oil. This administration, after the election, went to Venezuela to beg Maduro, a terrorist, for more oil. They lifted sanctions on the Venezuelan regime so they can send more oil to Americans. 18 times more polluting, Venezuelan oil, 18 times with an X, than an Alaska project. And now we have to beg? Makes no sense.
All right. You have time for one more question. Mark Sabatini, Juneau Empire.
got an icebreaker question. You said on the floor that somebody in the middle of the night basically killed it. So I'm curious who killed it and why. And then because this very likely could be related, there was something in the thousands of pages in the omnibus about the Coast Guard going and looking for doing some follow-up work that would include looking at foreign vessels as well as domestic. Are you willing to consider a foreign vessel at this point as well as one made in the U.S. So once they get that far?
So, Mark, it's a great question. Both questions are really good questions. Like who, fingerprints, we're still trying to figure out. But what our final understanding of what happened, and again, this is why these omnibuses are so frustrating, because it's just really opaque, and the deals get cut at the very end, and you have no idea what's happening. And it's really frustrating. It's not considered like what they call regular order. It's kind of the opposite of regular order. My understanding of what happened was at the very end, somebody on some side, remember it's Pelosi, McCarthy, Schumer, and McConnell and their staffs making the final call. Someone at the very end said they needed more money for border security. This is like within the final 2 hours. And evidently someone else said, all right, we can yank this icebreaker funding for additional border security funding. That is my understanding. And trust me, we've been trying to dig deep on this. But that's kind of a little bit hearsay, to be honest, but I think that's correct. But to your question of who exactly, I still don't really know. Somebody in that, and maybe the appropriation chair and vice chair were cutting those deals at the literally 11th hour. And then to your other question, what I've done on this throughout the process, both in terms of where the Coast Guard was going to choose a home port in Alaska, and in terms of purchasing a off-the-shelf icebreaker, I've always just said, look, I leave that to the Coast Guard, right? That's their professional judgment. So on both of those issues, where to home port it and what to buy, that's a decision for the Coast Guard to make. I've never tried to influence either of those. I've just been really pushing them to do it. And the good news is they're finally doing it. But we have this hiccup, as I mentioned in my remarks in there, that was frustrating, to be perfectly honest, because we lined up about as good as you can in the legislative process, the president's budget, authorization language, and some appropriation language, and at the end of the day, it still got removed for this other border security issue, which is my understanding. Okay, thanks everybody. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you guys, and I'll be around after the senator leaves if you have any more additional follow-up questions.
All right, well, thank you guys all for being here today. It has been wonderful to be with you all. And give me just a second. I'm going to flip off some screens here, get things moving right along, and help us grow, help us do a little bit more, help us become a bigger and better at what we do. And it can be all done by your support. Go to politadick.com, click that support button. All proceeds go right back into doing what we're doing here today, and or other days or other events that we'll be with. Starting next Monday, we'll be listening to Kelly Chewbacca and Democracy for Alaska on ranked choice voting and getting rid of it and taking back the United States back into the hands of the American people who are here and out of the control of the dictator bureaucracy of our governments, the biggest child traffickers in the United States. Thank you guys all again for being here today. That was State Senator Dan Sullivan giving his state of our union for the state of Alaska, and also his press availability at the very end there. A lot of gaslighting going on, a lot of grim outlook, especially when it comes to, like, say, the Willow project going on out there, and the decision that'll be coming out about that here in the next 30 days. And it is just amazing how they will beat the drum on one thing and slam the door on others when it comes to our legislators or our senators down in D.C. declaring where they stand and the values that they stand for. If it was me and I had a choice and I could convince every Alaskan to follow behind this logic of thinking, we already go against federal laws on many different levels. Let's throw it out there. Marijuana being the #1 here in Alaska, we are completely criminal in the federal government's eyes when it comes to our marijuana and selling it here in our state. It goes completely against the law, yet we do it. Then you take the entire United States and look at just the marijuana laws, or how about sanctuary states who are allowing illegal aliens within and give them all the rights and privileges of an American citizen and then some, and completely ignoring the federal government's laws. There, we are constantly and consistently flipping the middle finger when it's expedient for them to do so for a profitable gain in their own pockets or a political motivation when it comes to, like, illegal aliens and the border crossings. We've given more to Ukraine for aid and military weapons and just outright handing them big old huge pallets full of cash to protect their borders than we have given to our own border. We could have completely built the southern border now 3 times over with what they have sent to Ukraine, built it 5 times higher, and had all of the latest and greatest, newest technologies that haven't even been invented yet installed into that border for what they have sent out for that there. All right, I am off my soapbox for today, and tomorrow, just so you guys are all on the same page, we've got 2 bills being heard in the Senate Education Committee tomorrow starting at 3:30. SB 14, which is the retirement, that they have slipped certain things in there that you need to be aware of. This is their first time hearing the bill. This is the defined benefits package slipped into what they want to call the education package. This is combining what they want for the defined benefits for the firefighters and police officers and such. This is expanding it to give it the same package to education. And so, just so that you're aware, they are taking public testimony on this tomorrow at 3:30 as soon as they get done presenting it for the very first time. And also on the student base allocation, we are also going to be on SB 52, I think is the correct number for that one. And they will be taking public testimony on that. That is a $1,000 per student increase right there. And that student increase base roughly equates out to around $150 million more dollars a year that are worst in the nation education system, ranked 49th right now currently, and at nearly double to triple the cost of anywhere else in the nation. They want $150 million with no accountability of where that money goes for or the outcomes that it would produce if they were even given it. I hope our governor's got his veto practicing that signature down very well, and he is warming his hands up to be able to get that accomplished, because many of the things that are being pushed through the Senate Finance and Education and the House Finance and Education committees out there these things really need to be taken a very, very hard look at. And like HB 22, the defined benefits that just went through the Affairs Committee, that was illegally passed through by a senior member as the chair and his co-chair, the freshman who doesn't know anything. He's so wet behind the ears that, well, we'll just put it this way. I know diapers that are maybe older than he is. Anyways, that is the end of it all today. Tomorrow at 3:30, please call in, give testimony on SB 14 and SB 52, the defined retirement benefits package that they want to include education into, and the student-based allocation, both very important to be given testimony on tomorrow. If you haven't liked and shared this video, please do that right now. You can find this on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook, all at Politadick, and you can also find it on Facebook at Politadick Unfiltered, and in the next few hours you'll find this on Rumble at rumble.com/Politadick, or just type in Politadick if you're on the Rumbles page, and find us, subscribe to us, like us there. As soon as we reach 100 subscribers, we'll be able to live stream to them directly, and you won't have to wait for hours or days for it to propagate over to their platform. And as always, you can find this live at Politadick.com and on our live link there. As long as we're live, it is live on our website, which is back up and running. Still has a bunch of glitches that I'm trying to work out in my spare time, which I don't have a lot of, but you can help change that. Make it so that I can do this full time, and there is nothing else I do but cover Alaska politics, show up to the assembly meetings, can afford to be at them, can afford to be at the school board meetings, can afford to go drive around and go live stream those picketers of the school bus drivers that abandoned our children at school and left us parents high and dry, trying to scramble, take off work, make other plans for a school district that's not even supporting the students by reopening up the online learning so that they don't have to worry about making up work or any classes that they are missing because the parents can't afford to get them to school because the school board and the school buses have completely failed us all once again. And I don't think it's the school board's fault other than the online learning portion. What I do find atrocious is the school bus drivers and the union that they work for. Durham, it never, the political shenanigans that came away from who was it, First something, I can't remember the other buses service before them, but they were basically, they had the contract taken away from them because of bidding negotiations and what the services they could provide. And now to watch the school buses themselves use the manipulation and use our children as weapons. You see it all the time. The education board used our children as weapons yesterday during their testimonies that they gave, the private special testimonies that they gave to the school boards and children of the schools that they hauled in all from around the state. 27 different school boards represented there yesterday in their own private testimonies in front of the Senate Education Committee. And guess what? Our turn is tomorrow at 3:30 for be able to do the same thing on the same bill. The only difference is they're taking the allocated time that they gave them completely 100% uninterrupted. They're dividing our time with the new introduction of their latest corruption, SB 14, which is defined benefit retirements package. They're trying to hide it underneath the bringing in retired teachers and allowing them to go back to work and still be able to collect their retirement. But the deeper you get into the bill, that's when you get to find all of they start talking about firefighters and police officers and the HB 22 defined benefits package bill that is being pushed through. This is where they include the education or our school districts and all of that into the defined benefits. It is a dirty tactic to bring the entire front end of the bill saying, oh, look, we're going to bring back retired teachers. We'll help fill the void of the vacancies we have in staffing for teachers. And but hidden as you get deeper into reading of what is inside of the bill, that's when they bring in the defined benefits package also into it. Just want to keep you guys all aware and up to date on that. And I really would like to continue to keep doing this full time, but it takes you guys to help me do that and your support. So go to Politadick.com, click that support button, and make a donation. All donations go right back into doing what I'm doing here right now. Hell, if I was able to get enough of you to donate every single month, you bet you would find me quitting my current job, my company that I own. I would be passing it off probably on to somebody else to do, and you would find me in Juneau right now, literally sitting in the hallways waiting for them to come out of these committee meetings, come out of these floor sessions, and waiting to get legislators on the record, speaking in front of the camera, talking to all of us and all of you, and every Alaskan out there telling us about the shenanigans, asking them, what the hell were you thinking when you voted yes, or why did you not do that again? You should have known better. We've told you over and over again. Here is the list of 100,000 Alaskans that have said just that over and over and over again. Why don't you listen? And the very rare, give them a pat on the back. Good job. Well done. I am amazed you did the right thing, which would very rarely probably come out of my mouth after 5, almost 6 years now of watching them down there in Juneau. So thank you guys all for being here once again. I really do appreciate it. You guys all have yourself a great afternoon. Don't forget the State of the Union address by Comrade Joe Biden. President Joe Biden will be tonight, and I may or may not be trying to stream that. It depends on my workload, which I need to go get back to right now. My phone has been ringing off the hook through most of this, and it's getting annoying in my ears to keep hearing it going off. So someone wants my attention really bad. So I need to get back to what I do to make a living. Again, thank you guys all for being here tonight. Greatly appreciate it. You guys all have yourselves a great evening or afternoon, and we'll see you the next time.